L. Ron Hubbard's Valuable Document Policies and How Scientology Used Them to Confiscate Kids' Passports. By Serge Delmar. Scientology's practice of confiscating passports, especially from foreign Sea Org members, stems from a combination of L. Ron Hubbard's policies on document security, organizational control, and the rigid hierarchy of authority within the cult. While no single policy explicitly states, take members' passports to control them, several of Hubbard's writings laid the foundation for this highly illegal practice. Here's a breakdown of how Scientology justifies passport confiscation using Hubbard's policies. 1. HCO Policy Letter March 13, 1961. The Valuable Document Policy. What it says. Hubbard's Valuable Document Policy is a prime example of how Scientology buries control tactics under layers of bureaucratic euphemism. The policy states that all valuable documents must be locked away and controlled by authorized personnel, but the term itself is intentionally vague. By lumping passports in with financial records and legal paperwork, Scientology reframed personal identification as cult property rather than an individual's legal right. This semantic manipulation made it policy, not theft, when Sea Org officials took passports from recruits, especially minors and foreign members, under the guise of keeping them safe. In reality, it was a calculated move to strip people of their autonomy and make escape nearly impossible. This policy establishes that all valuable documents related to the organization must be kept under lock and key, accessible only to authorized personnel. Hubbard defines valuable documents broadly, including legal records, financial papers, and other important materials. How Scientology uses it to justify taking kids' passports. Sea Org recruits, especially minors and foreign members, were conditioned to believe that their passports fell under the category of valuable documents. They were told, "Your passport is a security risk if lost, so we must keep it safe. It's for your own protection. We handle all personnel documents in HCO. This is standard policy." Once the passport was handed over, it was nearly impossible to get back without undergoing a long and punitive routing out process, often involving financial penalties, security checks, and coerced confessions. 2. HCO Policy Letter March 1, 1965. Safeguarding Technology. What it says. This policy mandates that Scientology's teachings and materials be strictly controlled to prevent them from being lost, altered, or falling into the wrong hands. It establishes the idea that sensitive information must be locked away and accessible only to those in authority. How Scientology uses it to justify taking passports. Scientology extends this principle beyond written teachings to include personal identification documents. Passports were classified as sensitive because they represented a member's ability to leave. By framing passport control as a security measure, the Church created an environment where members would voluntarily surrender their legal identification under the belief that it was standard policy. 3. Flag Order 3434-RB. The Rehabilitation Project Force, RPF, Rules, 1977, revised 1997. What it says. This order governs the rules for the Sea Org's Punitive Labor Camp, the RPF. It states that RPF members have restricted rights and must comply with strict disciplinary measures, including full physical unlawful confinement. How Scientology uses it to justify taking passports. Sea Org members who tried to leave were often threatened with being assigned to the RPF, a fate that could mean years of unpaid labor and severe psychological abuse. Foreign members were especially vulnerable, as they had no access to their passports and were dependent on the Church for housing and legal work authorization. Kids attempting to leave were told they had out ethics and needed to complete months or years of punishment before being allowed access to their identification. 4. The Stable Datum, Doctrine, Control through Policy. What it says. Hubbard's Stable Datum principle states that people function best when given an unchanging, absolute point of reference. This is used to justify strict obedience to policy within Scientology. How Scientology uses it to justify taking passports. Sea Org members were taught that Hubbard's policies are unchangeable, absolute laws. The idea that valuable documents must be under cult control became a stable datum. Members believed it without question. This was especially effective on children raised in Scientology, who never had an opportunity to develop independent critical thinking about their rights, and were groomed by all Scientology parents to accept and view, including not limited to the abuse and illegal felonies perpetrated against them, as normal and part of what saving a world was all about. How this violates the law. 1. U.S. Federal Law, Trafficking Victims Protection Act, TVPA, 22 U.S.C. Section 70102. What it says: human trafficking includes using force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or services. Taking someone's passport to prevent them from leaving is considered coercion. How Scientology violates it. The cult confiscates passports under false pretenses and uses them to restrict a person's freedom. 2. 18 U.S.C. Section 1592, Document Confiscation. What it says: it is illegal to knowingly take, conceal, remove, or possess someone's passport to force them into labor. How Scientology violates it. This is exactly what happens to foreign Sea Org recruits. They are stripped of their legal identification, making it nearly impossible to escape. 3. International Law, the Palermo Protocol, 2000. What it says: the United Nations Protocol defines human trafficking as any practice that uses deception, coercion, or abuse of vulnerability to control a person's movement. How Scientology violates it. The cult deceives recruits into handing over their passports and then exploits their vulnerability to keep them in forced labor conditions. Why this matters. 1. Kids cannot consent to this. A child cannot legally consent to signing away their freedom. A child cannot legally consent to being trafficked across international borders. A child cannot legally consent to handing over their passport to a cult. 2. This is happening right now. Scientology is still bringing in foreign recruits and taking their passports. The organization still justifies it using Hubbard's policies. The government has never held them accountable for this. 3. It's time to demand action. Former Sea Org members need to come forward. Law enforcement must investigate passport confiscation in Scientology. Congress must close the loopholes that allow kids trafficking to continue. Scientology is a criminal enterprise. For decades, Scientology has operated with impunity, using Ron Hubbard's policies to justify human trafficking, forced labor, and kids' passports confiscation. They have convinced thousands of people, many of them children, that giving up their legal documents was normal. But here's the truth. This was never normal. It was always criminal. It's time to hold Scientology MF accountable.